Hello, and welcome to the first Believe show of 2021. Welcome. We're very glad you're here. Just to set the tone, because some of you might be new, ask us lots of questions, pop in comments that you have, takeaways. We're very, very interactive here, and we look forward to talking with you. Hello, Sean.
Hi, Sanya.
I am thrilled to introduce Sean. Sean is a longtime friend, Sean Doyle. He is the author of this amazing book that I frequently have. I've bought many, many copies and given them to friends. I have it on my shelf regularly. It is A Poet's Approach to Positive Psychology. That's my personal take on it, Sean, but I'm a big Sean fan, and I'll tell you a little bit about him before we get started. So let me show you some things about Sean. First of all, this is Sean's website. It's at JohnSeanDoyle.com. And as you can see, it has some really nice and good messages and lots of blogging. So Sean also blogs and writes a lot. It has some information about Sean. And then the last thing that I want to show you before we get started is Sean's book on Amazon. It's called Mud and Dreams. Again, big, big fan of the book. And the final thing for you to know about Sean before we start is that Sean has negotiated over and successfully resolved over 10,000 negotiations. Over 10,000, that number blows my mind. To do 10,000 of anything, but to do 10,000 of negotiations is amazing. Hello, Sean.
Hello.
Hi.
Thank you for the very warm introduction.
Oh, it's delightful to have you here. We have a ton of people with us today. So as we're joining, would you please tell us where are you from? Just so we have a little sense of where you're from. And you can type that right into the comments as we get started. So hi, Sean, 10,000 negotiations. That's just unthinkable.
Yeah, so my day job, I'm a lawyer. I've been doing that for 30-ish years. And for the majority of my legal career, what I did was negotiate agreements. And so as I looked at one point, I kind of tallied up, roughly how many I was doing per day each week over the years. And the number came out somewhere north of 10,000. And, of course, a lot of those were little, easy, quick ones, but then there's all sorts of, stickier ones in there as well.
So before we get started with the belief question, let's ask our sort of rapid fire, silly, fun questions. What did you want to be when you grew up?
I wanted to be a poet and a psychologist, actually. So lawyer was not on the list, but it's the other two were.
Those other two are still playing out, even
right.
with your law career. That's really cool. And what is one of your favorite foods?
I chose my law school based on the food and the music. And if I'm going to suffer in law school, I want to go someplace fun. So I moved to New Orleans. And so it would be seafood, oysters, soft shell crab are probably the top of the list.
Oh,
so
that's awesome. For anybody who is before their lunchtime, you are probably salivating, and that's a good way to discuss negotiations as we're about to. And then our last rapid fire question at the beginning. High school is sometimes a challenging time. What was a good part of high school for you?
I was not a particularly good student in high school, but I was good at sports and had lots of really, really close friends through playing sports, and really developed some close friendships with those and had a good time with it.
Yeah, I'm always such a fan of, my parents had me do sports the whole time and throughout school. I'm always such a fan of just the things that you learn from sports that you don't even need to name at the time. Dedication, perseverance, teamwork, just all of those things that get imbued into your life.
Yeah, and there's still kind of metaphors from sports that I vividly remember happening that will come to me now. That I ran, and I ended up running in college too. And I remember vividly there was one race I was in that I felt like the pace was just too fast, that everybody was. So I'm in the middle of it. You're struggling, having those doubts, and I'm thinking, geez, I can't keep up with everybody else. This pace is too fast. And then I noticed other people starting to drop off and realized, they're thinking the same thing I'm thinking. And so I actually picked up the pace. We dropped a few more people. And that's just been a great life lesson. I mean, so often, people are, and this plays out in the negotiations as well. People are going through the same doubts and struggles and thoughts that you are too. And it's okay. And that's okay. You just kind of set it aside and stay focused on what it is that you're trying to do.
That's really cool. That's really cool. Believe. What is it that you believe that others in your field may not agree with you about?
So, that we can figure stuff out. So it's really in this is the context of the negotiations, is that more often than not, even with stuff that feel like might be insurmountable issues, more often than not, people do figure these things out. Certainly not always, but more often than you'd think that people can. And a lot of times the positions that people are arguing for aren't the only ways to meet their needs. And so it's really comes down to looking for, it's like you in the coaching, is just asking a lot of questions and really, really trying to understand what's the interest of the other party. And most often I can find a way to meet their interest while also protecting the interest of my client.
And so when you do that, do you find that it can be any part of the range from comfortable conversation to really lots of conflict, or do you tend to like to get it to one or the other parts of that range yourself?
No, that's funny. I don't like conflict at all. So.
Sean, that's hilarious. So here you've done 10,000 negotiations and you don't like conflict at all. In fact, let me put up a comment that somebody who's watching said. So Nat says, talk about 10,000 hours of expertise, but 10,000 negotiations is a whole different story. Absolutely. Okay, and you're saying I don't like conflict.
Yeah, no, I don't like conflict, and it's, looking at different types of legal practice. Some people litigate. I've litigated before. I don't like that at all, because then it really is. Some people thrive in it, but that really is more, fighting over stuff. With the negotiations, most of the time, not always, the parties want to reach agreement. That's why they're doing a deal together. I've certainly done deals where the parties had a legal obligation to work together, but they didn't want to. That makes it a little bit tougher. But so I don't. So I'm always trying to find ways to bring the parties together. Mm-hmm. And even if they don't want to work together, but they have to. Okay, well, that's the given there is that they have to work together. Mm-hmm. So now, how do we make it a situation that makes it more palatable for both? So I try to avoid the conflict, but there one time in particular. This is my own. It was a lesson to me that we got into the middle of this one, and the parties start yelling at each other, and I'm feeling like this is great. Now we're touching the stuff that really matters. They're not playing games anymore. We're really. And I look over, I had my sales guy with me, and he's in an absolute, I'm loving this. He's in an absolute panic. And that's when I realized, oh, wait a minute. No, this is okay. We're not going to let the deal go. Now we're getting to the root of it and the important stuff. So I like to avoid the yelling part, but that comes up every now and then.
So tell me if I've got it right. So your belief is that most of the time negotiations can be resolved so that both parties end up actually happy.
Yeah, and it's not about compromise. I mean, that a lot of times parties really can get what they want out of something, and those are formal legal negotiations, but they're also everything we're navigating in life where we have to negotiate and we have to sort of look at different interests, and most often people really can figure it out and find ways to work together in ways that are good for everybody.
Yeah, I'm really glad you said that, actually. One of my professors at Stanford was Maggie Neal, who in negotiations, she's just always said that negotiations is really problem solving. So if two people want to problem solve together, yes, they can negotiate, but it's a conversation. It's a discussion.
Right.
Yeah, and so that applies to anything in life. It applies to talking with your family, to anything, not just the big agreement legally. How did you come to this belief that most negotiations are resolvable?
through the course of 10,000 negotiations. I mean, it really was, as I'd be working on things, and it's a lot of it was sort of stumbling along, that people would dig their heels in on positions and everything else, and just trying to figure out, well, how do we get around this? And it just and it backs it. I feel kind of committed to that belief just from seeing things that we've worked through, that people thought there's no way that we can resolve something here. I mean, just a simple thing. So what, like matters of price in a contract negotiation. I mean, that's one. There's other stuff that it's easier to see how there might be different interests at stake, but sometimes you're really stuck with a price, and where the parties don't necessarily reach agreement on those, but by asking questions and finding out what really is the interest of the other side, maybe the other person's bonus or commission is based on the timing of the agreement, or maybe there's opportunities to strike other deals too. So, okay, well, maybe we might give you that price on this one, but we're also interested in these other things. So you can broaden the scope of the negotiation out, so that you give a little bit here, but then you end up gaining in another aspect. And it's just again, it goes back to really wanting to understand what the interest of the other side is. And they might not even know what their interest is. They just kind of know, I've been given this thing that I need. Well, like what's the why behind that? What does that get you, or what are you trying to solve for? And are there other ways we can get you to the same place?
What are some of the best techniques for yourself that you feel these are reliable, that I can use to elicit that information and have a more nuanced conversation?
I mean, a lot of it's, I'm not sure that this answers the question. A lot of it is asking questions and just pushing the conversation deeper to see what's behind whatever it is that the other side's asking for. And one thing that I've really seen with that is a lot of times people will go into it with their positions and they're just kind of butting heads against each other. I'll push all that aside and just kind of lay it out and say, well, let's dig into that. Why, what is it that you're trying to get? What are you trying to solve for? How does this help with that? And when the other side recognizes that I'm really trying to understand what their interests are, then they end up most often being more open to hearing what my needs are too, as opposed to immediately locking in their heels. And I mean, that's similar, to take it back to positive psychology, to John Gottman's research with the four horsemen of the apocalypse and in relationships, where once one party stops being defensive and starts listening, like really trying to understand where the other one's coming from, it makes the other one more receptive to listening as well.
Does this mean that you don't, most of your work is actually not, here's a contract, we'll look at it, we'll send comments to the other side, they'll look at it, they'll send comments, but it sounds like a lot of your work is actually in conversation. It's not in documents going back and forth. But
the documents, that's usually the first part. So
the documents start the process.
We'll exchange drafts, and what I'll try to do, using the redlining function. And what I typically try to do is, when I see the red lines from the other side, I'll try to guess, what I think their interest is. And of course, if I can accept that, I accept it. But if I've got questions, I'll use the comments feature to ask, or if I have assumptions, I'll put those in there. Or the other thing that I found helps me a lot is when I propose alternative language, or if I reject their language, I'll use the comments feature to give a why. Say, oh, here's why we can't do that. What if we do this instead? Well, I'll give a little bit there, so they're not just looking at the cold red line. And that resolves a lot of it. And then a lot of times you get together in the conversation, but they've already got that background too. They see, here's what our interest is. Here's what we can do. Here's why we can't do that. They've already got that going into the face-to-face discussion, which tends to make it easier.
So this is really surprising to me, because when I first heard your thesis of, look, over 10,000 negotiations, I do think
Yeah.
people can come to terms. What I heard you saying is, I need to ask questions, I need to learn, then they'll see I'm more vulnerable, they'll ask me questions. So it sounded like more conversation based, but just everything I've seen about agreements in the law is that it starts with a paper document. So you're saying it actually, you can get to that discussion, and you can do it through not just back and forth redlining, but actually use the other features, the comments, assumptions, whys.
Oh yeah, and so usually there's a lot more time spent redlining than in the conversation.
Yeah.
But the conversation really moves stuff forward once you've worked through the other things. There was one lawyer that I was working on a deal with, who is just unbelievably difficult, wanted to fight about everything, just very, it was not the most pleasant negotiation. And then I was at a continuing legal education class, we all have to do continuing legal education stuff, and went out to dinner with a bunch of the folks afterwards, and ended up sitting next to this lawyer. And we didn't know, we didn't discover that until we were there, that we were working on this deal together. We'd only talked on the phone and traded emails. After sitting in and having a meal with him, things got so much easier afterwards. And it's still, you're still dealing with the same substantive issue, but the dynamic changes. And all of a sudden you realize, okay, this guy's not trying to just jerk me around or be, difficult. There's a real reason there, and they're receptive to hearing what my needs are. And that just helps move everything along.
Just even the way you describe it, your tone of describing kind of takes it from these heightened stakes to, hey, let's figure it out.
Yeah. And I've said that before too. It's like, well, let's figure this out.
Yeah.
And again, it's, most of the time it's my clients are wanting to reach a deal. So it's, so the parties know that going in, and sometimes they have to be reminded that it's like, wait a minute, we want to work with you. We're trying to do something that works for everybody. And especially if you're having some sort of long-term relationships, long-term contractual relationship, I don't want the other side to be unhappy with the deal, because then they're going to be difficult with every little step in the process of the relationship. It's a whole lot harder. This is, I've got friends that do divorces and things like that. Those can be a whole lot more difficult because, sometimes one party just wants to make it hard on the other party, even if it's hard on themselves. And that stuff's, those aren't as much fun, and those are harder. But even with those, if you're looking around and thinking about the kids, or thinking about a place where there is a joint interest, you can hopefully help move things in a way that works for everyone.
Yeah. At this point, we ask the people who are with us, what are your takeaways so far from what Sean said, or some thoughts that you're having as Sean is speaking, or some things that you're thinking about in terms of how you can problem solve or negotiate with people in your life, whether home or work? And as we're asking you that question, what are some takeaways you have? I'm going to put up a comment from Christian, and he says, refreshing conversation applied to legal and negotiations. I'm usually the sales guy next to the lawyer and probably have 700 negotiations under his belt. And he says he fully relates to Sean's approach of finding alternatives and understanding the core needs to find a win-win solution. Thank you, Christian. I'm usually that sales guy. I like that. That's very self-aware. Like that's where I am in that world that Sean painted. Sean, what else on this topic that I haven't asked you about? What other things should people consider as they walk, because we're in negotiations all the time, as they walk into negotiations?
That it's not always easy. Each party, they don't always know what it is that they really want. That's the surprising thing. Is there've been times that I'd look at stuff beforehand and think, oh, the solution to this is super easy if the parties would only see this. And then as we're doing this digging deeper into exploring what the interests really are, they come up with a great solution that I would have never thought of, but that really satisfies what each one is looking for. And so it's just staying open to it and, letting yourself know what you're ultimately willing to agree to or willing to walk away from, or what your alternatives are. I mean, that's an important piece of it. But lots of people will play games with they go high and expect to negotiate down and whatever. I usually don't. I usually will, I'm giving a reasonable offer and can support that. And and once the parties start and the people do the bad cop, good cop stuff, I don't do that stuff. It's like, let's push past all that and just kind of get to the real heart of what it is that we're trying to do. And most often you push the games aside and that stuff works out pretty well.
Yeah. You're just making it sound very human.
Yeah, well, and it's part of it. I mean, you've seen the data about lawyers and well-being and how we're the highest in job dissatisfaction and depression and just this whole other parade of horribles. And the way I approach it is that if I'm going to be practicing law 8 hours a day for 30 years, I want to make this human. I don't want to walk away at the end of the day feeling exhausted and beaten down. And everybody's got stuff we need to figure out. Let's work together on this.
A little bit like how you chose your law school. Is there going to be good music? Is there going to be good food?
Yeah, no, that really was the decision process.
I'm in this profession. How can I make it more human? How can I make it so that we're walking away at the end of the day all feeling pretty good?
Right. And I didn't think of this before, but that's kind of the whole theme of the book, Mud and Dreams. We've got these challenges and hardships and difficult things come up. The book is not about law, but it's just about the struggles that we all face as adults, and yet we can fall deeply in love with life anyway. And so that's, take these things that are the given, the hard stuff that we don't necessarily want to have to deal with, and figure out, okay, well, how can I turn this into the best possible scenario?
I know you and I were talking about that before the show, and you said, no, not only do I not like conflict, but I actually try to get enthusiasm and good feelings in a negotiation.
Yeah. I definitely get into flow once I'm in the middle of it. I mean, but it is there for the longest time. For one of my jobs, I was responsible for the difficult negotiations. So people would start off, they'd all get mad at each other, and they'd bring me in the room when everybody's yelling at each other. And each time I'm like, well, I don't want to do this. I hate getting dragged into these. But then once you start, the legal problem you're dealing with is a puzzle anyway. Yeah. But then you've got the psychological dynamic, and I just would tap into my VIA strengths, my personal, strengths of character around curiosity and things along those lines. And I would get into a sense of flow as I'm trying to untangle this, and you start seeing where all the pieces fit together. Yeah. And one of the key things with flow is you feel like you're in control when you aren't necessarily, and that's absolutely describes the negotiations. And my sales guy next to me who's feeling panicked, I feel like, no, we got this. It's like, this is the best thing we can be in. Everyone, I don't know if we do or not.
This is good. Let me tell you a comment someone has, and then a question, and then we will wrap up with a couple of more. So somebody says that one of their takeaways from what you've been saying is to be a good listener.
Yeah, no, that's key. Is if you're just going in trying to bully the process, it's even if you end up with a signed document at the end, it's most likely the parties aren't going to be happy with what it is that they agreed to.
And then one person has a question for you. Nat asks, would you recommend for someone to write down all the acceptable potential alternatives before the negotiation, just to know what this person wants and to help to get to a better outcome faster?
I would certainly think through them, but then still remain open, because again, we don't necessarily always know what it is that we're interested in. So we might come up with our list of, okay, here's the stuff that would work. But as you go through this exercise and trying to explore what the party's interests are, stuff might occur to you. And so absolutely think about it, jot them down if it helps, but then remain open, because a lot of times I have no idea where it's going to end up, and it ends up in a pretty good place.
It's so interesting. It's like a coaching session. When you're coaching somebody, you don't know what they're going to come up with. So it's so interesting that you say that in a negotiation, you're trying and you're helping both sides come together, but you don't know what they'll resolve it with.
Yeah. And like coaching too. I mean, the times that I've done coaching, a lot of times I'd be sitting there saying, I know how to fix this. If they just listen to me.
And it's not that at all.
That doesn't work.
Yes. Sean, our two last questions. What, as people are with us today, what is a thought that you would like to leave everybody with on this topic?
That there are reasons to be hopeful and optimistic. I mean, stay open, inject humanity into things, and things will work out okay.
Thank you. And the last question: if you could snap your fingers and almost everyone in the world were to take some action, what would you want that action to be?
Ooh, you've asked me this question before. And I probably answered it differently before, but it would have something to do with humility, and playfulness and humor, and not taking ourselves too seriously. Everybody's just bumping around, trying to figure stuff out and trying to do the best they can. And the way we're going to get there is if we're all working together. And part of that process is just kind of letting go of some of your own stuff and recognizing, that this is we can have fun in this process, and just to play with it and have fun with it.
What you say makes me think of a quote that's bounced around before, which is, we're all like batteries just waiting to be included.
Okay.
Yeah. So humility, playfulness, openness.
Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Sean. Thank you so very much. Wonderful having you on.
Thank you. This was wonderful, Senya. I really appreciate it. I feel honored to be on your show. So.
I'm thrilled you're here. I've been wanting to have you on, and I'm thrilled we got to talk about this topic. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
All the best, everybody. See you next time.